Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Emma's Market Spotlight on Canada. Really great to see so many of you here. My name is Michelle Ronquillo, and I am Emma's event manager. Just a little bit about us. Within Emma, we unite manager organizations across 13 European countries, which represent more than 2,000 managers across Europe. We've made it our mission to strengthen European managers globally through the Empower program, which encompasses education, advocacy, networking, and research. If you want to know more, or if you want to stay up to date with our upcoming events, make sure to visit our website, to subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on social media, and join our WhatsApp group. I will share the links in the chat in a little bit. Within the chat, I will also share the general manager contact list where you can leave your contact details in case you want to be contacted with the people that are attending today's session, as well as others. And also, when you log off soon at the end of the session, a super brief survey will pop up. Please take a moment to fill it out because your feedback helps us massively to improve our events. I am going to share the agenda of today. Today, we are in very good company, and this session is going to be moderated by our Executive Director, Jess Patridge. And yeah, there will be time for you to ask some questions. So please add them to the chat and we'll make sure that they get responded. And without further ado, Jess, over to you.
Thanks so much. Hey, everybody. Nice to see you all here. So I'm going to do a quick introduction to the market through a brilliant presentation provided by EACEA, which is the independent music organization in Canada. We'll hear more about them later, but unfortunately, they weren't able to present today. So I'll be sharing the presentation. Bear with me because Canada is not my expertise, but it is the expertise of the former speakers, sorry, that we have here with us today. So any gaps, they'll be able to fill it in for sure. I really want to reiterate that this is a time for you, for managers, to have a better understanding of the market. So if you have specific questions and you want to make sure that they're answered, I am keeping a close eye on the chat, and anytime, just like pop them in and I'll make sure I work them in. I don't want to wait till the end and then us go over time and not be able to get to your questions. So it's better to ask it right away. And also then it might be more relevant to the conversation. So before I get my panelists to introduce themselves, which I will do, don't worry, I am going to share my screen and give this short presentation. Okay, so as I said, this is an overview of the Canadian music market, and EACEA were very kind to share with us. We will share these slides with you after the session, so don't worry about that. There's some great information in here. So first up, the size of Canada. All of you, I'm sure, are aware Canada is a huge, huge country with many different parts of it. I think one of the most important things about it, with its 40 million population, is that it's really concentrated in specific areas, which is really relevant for music because it might be where you're focusing your time and attention on more. Yeah, because of the size of it, because of the huge diversity, there is a real hunger for many, many genres, and we'll look at what the most popular are in a minute. But yeah, as you can see from this, sorry, I'm just trying to get rid of having everyone in my way so I can't actually read the whole presentation. Okay, there we go. This is better for me, sorry. Okay, so yeah, it's a pretty high income, high economic rate country, and obviously high percentage of people use the internet, so obviously extremely relevant to music and streaming and how you might get your music out there, and also how much money people might have to spend on shows and luxuries. The music market, the 8th largest music market in the world, which is obviously huge. So a great one to target, a great one to look at for a number of reasons, but partly because of this. And yeah, really interesting that the growth is so strong that it was actually surpassing the US market. And also there's a rising trend for the popularity of Punjabi music. We often get a few Indian managers on these calls, so it's particularly relevant there. That's great. And yeah, something that's really interesting about the Canadian market is that it's actually owned a lot of the time by foreign-owned companies. I'm assuming this is because a lot of the big majors and everything like that is outside of Canada, maybe more focused on the US. And I think the really notable statistic here is foreign artists contribute to 80% of sales, which is a huge, huge percentage. So again, another great reason for looking at how you can grow your audience in this territory. They really do embrace international music. This goes in quite in depth about who owns the rights and whether they're foreign owned. So I will kind of skip over that. But yeah, streaming is the primary revenue driver, comprising of 74% of all recorded music revenue. So that's really, really big, huge penetration in the market. And physical formats still contribute 20% of total revenue. So when thinking about merch or what you'll be bringing over, or not, as we'll look at in a second, is really, really important. And yeah, obviously with performing rights contributing 22% of the revenue, really highlights the importance of live performances and public broadcasts. There is strong broadcasting in Canada, as far as I'm aware. Again, my experts will go further into this. 80% of Canadians stream audio content every month. So that's huge, with 43% of them streaming, paying for streaming services. And Spotify, as in a lot of places, is the most popular DSP, but YouTube follows closely behind. So definitely can tell you more about where to focus your efforts. And yeah, more about streaming in Canada, particularly. Yeah, just a lot of stats about those, but I think the really interesting thing here is the genre focus. So alt and classic rock, country, hip hop, R&B, and pop, really, really popular genres. And I mean, I know a lot of us focus on that, but it can show a great, a particular good reason for particular genres to look at this. But there is a huge growth in electronic, house, jazz, heavy metal, and K-pop. Obviously here at Emma, we do have specific genre groups for different managers, so it could be especially relevant. Something that's, again, really interesting about the Canadian market is they do have a number of independent distributors. So if you did want to look at having a distributor based in Canada that might have a little bit more pull, a few more connections, definitely on the ground representation, you might want to look at having your Canadian distribution done by one of these companies. Also super important is that they have 15 vinyl pressing plants, which is a huge number. I'm not even sure if we have that number in the whole of Europe. So yeah, when thinking about whether to ship your vinyl over or maybe get some more pressed, could be really important to look at these options. Again, EACEA will have more information about that, and there is a contact at the end that could help you if this is something you're interested in. And yeah, Canada has a lot of associations and is pretty famous for its funding. You might have heard of that in the past about how they support and fund music and how many of us are very envious of the way that it is supported. So yeah, here's a few of the organizations, and they might be useful to reach out to. They might be able to share information or help you get started when it comes to like looking at the Canadian market. So EACEA, obviously, our friends here, and ASIC, who are the French language side. We'll go more into those differences and how you might need to treat them in the panel. But yeah, there's also Factor and Music Action that administer the Canadian Music Fund, which yes, recently been boosted to 32 million, which is really exciting. Where we're hearing a lot about budget cuts, but Canada is investing in talent, which is great. And I'm excited to see how that will impact not only international collaborations, but the Canadian music scene in the near future. So yeah, there's lots and lots of different organizations, and a lot of them work in different provinces or only specifically in their provinces. So it's really important to think about where your aim might be, what you want to achieve, and where, to find out who you'd reach out to when it comes to these. So yeah, industry and licensing rights, just a quick overview of who's collecting what rights. And yeah, I'm sure your PROs have strong reciprocal deals with these. Really important one is industry conferences and festivals. So there's a lot of conferences in Canada. I mean, there's a lot of conferences everywhere now, but Canada is very, very strong, and they're great at inviting international people. So it's definitely something to look at. We have Mikey from Montreal here today, who will tell us more about that scene and how important it is in Canada. But this is a great overview. There are also tons of festivals. You'll notice a lot of these are actually folk festivals or focus on a specific genre. So again, depending on what genre you are, what you're looking at, will tell you a lot about what, yeah, your next move or what you should do when it comes to wanting to build an audience in Canada. Radio is particularly important in Canada. I've heard this before, and definitely something that we can chat about, but with a lot of commercial radio stations and also public radio, so again, that Canadian Broadcasting Corporation comes into it, there's just a really high use of radio. So this can be a great way of building audiences and finding new markets. There's a lot of independent radio that again have specific genres focus, like Indie 88 is a great example of that. And so doing a little bit of research and due diligence in this area could really, really help you build a strong audience. Here's a short overview of the media, print, online, TV. Some of it's Canadian only. Again, this is a presentation from EACEA focused on the Canadian independent market for themselves, but a lot of it will write about international music as well. So maybe if you already have a show or something, that it'd be really important to reach out to them, or if you're heading over. And yeah, music TV as well. I don't know if anyone remembers music TV and using it, but there definitely is a range of video channels. So something to think about when producing assets when you're aiming at certain markets. Social media, it's one of the most connected places in the world, as I'm sure you'd expect. And Facebook is still the most popular social media platform. I'm sure that a lot of us feel like we don't use Facebook all the time anymore. However, it is, or maybe that you're not feeling like your audiences are there, but it still is the most used in a lot of countries, including Canada. So really consider that. And so that is our quick overview of the market. This presentation was kindly provided by Trisha. You can see her email there. And as I said, we'll share the presentation so that you're able to have a better understanding. But now, with no further ado, I will let my panelists take the wheel. So I hope that was useful for a little bit of understanding of the market, but now let's meet the real people behind it. I'm going to go around one by one and ask you to introduce yourselves and say a bit more about what you do. And again, if anyone has any questions right off the bat, specifically for anybody, just pop them straight in the chat. So Sarah, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great. Thanks.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Porter. I own a company called Porter Music Management based in the nation capital in Ottawa, Canada. I started working in the music industry just a couple years before the pandemic, and I ended up being a booking agent for an Australian artist who wanted to come to Canada. And so that was great insight because I was the agent and all the hats, the publicist, the radio promoter, the marketing person, everything. And fast forward into now, I am now his international manager, and his name is Lloyd Spiegel, and I also work with a Canadian artist by the name of Mia Kelly.
Amazing. Thanks so much. Feel free to share some of the links in the chat as well for your artists so that we can check them out. Beth, it would be great to hear from you.
Hi, my name is Beth Cavanagh, and I'm a publicist based out of Toronto, Ontario, and I have been working PR for over 15 years in the Canadian market and work with primarily Canadian artists, but also have worked with international artists throughout my career.
Awesome, thanks. Mikey?
Hey, I'm all the way out west in the United States, so it's like 9 a.m. over here, so I'm the most tired one here. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I represent M for Montreal, showcase networking platform. People call it a festival, but there's a lot behind the scenes. It is co-founded by a European booker from the Glastonbury Festival. His name is Martin Elborn. He co-founded The Great Escape, WOMAD with Peter Gabriel, and then from Montreal as a way to bring more bands from Canada to Europe. And basically it happens once a year. It's very similar to South by Southwest or The Great Escape, but very condensed, small. We keep it to a point where everybody gets to meet each other. It's very practical, unlike the zoo-like festivals that you go to. So it's all about taking the time and meeting people and watching music and not getting drunk and getting lost in a bunch of other events that are happening at the same time. We keep it limited, small, and realistic. And it's a great way to network and export your artists not only to Canada, but to the United States, since we're so close to the US, and a lot of those Americans like Montreal, they like to go there. And you can meet a lot of them there too. So it's a great way to connect with people from 15 or plus different countries.
And just quickly, do you do an open call or anything in terms of for artists to play?
Yeah, we have a call for submissions, which is almost done. So once you're off of here, you can go submit your bands.
Well,
and,
I have shared the link for
we
your website.
We were very Canadian centric for a long time, but we're opening the door to share our platform with other people from all over the world to take advantage of how we do it. It's different. It's nice. You can look it up online and YouTube. There's videos and stuff.
Awesome, thanks so much. And Mike, last but not least.
Hi, everyone. My name's Mike. I'm a booking agent at the Paquin Artists Agency out of the Toronto office. I've been a booking agent for about 15 years now. Our company is the largest booking agency in Canada, and we represent a wide variety of acts, such as Canadian acts like Nickelback and Bryan Adams, but also European acts like Damso and French 79 and Wax Taylor, Orelsan, and a bunch of American stuff like Offspring and all that kind of stuff. So my job is mostly to get my artists booked, plan their tours, get them on festivals, private events, just a standard agency kind of job. It's a pleasure to meet everybody.
Thanks so much. So yeah, as you can see, we have a lot of different areas covered, and I know a lot of you have a few questions on sync as well, so we'll make sure that they are covered. Don't worry about it. I just want to start off with the kind of planning element. Like before you go, it's way more important to think and prepare. So I'm thinking especially about live, because obviously most people are coming over for their first shows. How do you approach the live market in Canada? What is there to like know about it? Because it is such a big country. Are there different scenes? There are different trends? Mikey and Mike, I'm thinking either of you could jump in, especially on this.
Yeah, I mean, I can touch on this a little bit. Mikey, sorry, do you want to jump in first?
Please, you, I guess.
No. Great. So yeah, as mentioned, Canada is a massive country with a lot of land to cover. For reference, that population that was listed on SEMA, that might look large, but that is basically the population of California.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So, we have about the population of one territory in the US covers the entire country. So that's a big factor to consider. 75% of the population in Canada lives in Southern Ontario or around the Ontario to, let's say, Montreal mark. So that would be a point of a large focus. And that's also why you'll mostly see big American acts might just come in and play Montreal and Toronto as part of a US tour. So there's a few things to consider, budget being primarily the big one. If you're a developing act and you want to come do 5 to 10 dates in Canada, you may want to consider doing that closer to where the population may lie. So in Ontario to Montreal, we'll call Montreal as sort of the border town next to Ontario. There is a good level of markets that you can drive to within, let's call it 2 to 5 hour drives. However, once you start hitting Western Canada, Winnipeg to Vancouver, let's call it, those drives turn to 6 to 8 hours. So, you have to consider your cost of lodging, your cost of food, everything you have to consider on a normal tour. Plus, you have to consider getting to Canada. So those flights, the immigration, luckily with Europe, most countries don't need visas to come to Canada. But there's still, bringing in merch or having all of this stuff planned, submitting your carnet, et cetera, et cetera. So it really sort of depends on what the manager's plan is. And really, ultimately, it's on what level is the band act. If the act is a very young developing act and you can't afford to go tour for, let's call it $500 Canadian for each market, it might make sense to look at an M for Montreal or in Toronto Canadian Music Week to start introducing yourself to the market. It really all depends on where we're going. If a label's going to support a ton of this tour, then we can look at, there's an easy 30 markets to play in Canada on a tour. It just depends if you can do it and if you can afford to and if you have the time.
Absolutely. Mikey, is there anything you want to add to that, especially about like genres or scenes or anything like that for people?
Well, first of all, Mike stole my speech. I was going to say the exact same thing. Thanks a lot, Mike. I appreciate that.
Sorry,
You must have stole my my script. No, I'm kidding. Good job. No, he gave a big presentation on Canada, which is really informative. I will obviously advocate for face-to-face events where you can meet plenty of people. I know we've all done them. We all go to these things, but you can't beat that face-to-face networking versus an email with no face and no character. Canadians have a lot of character, and if you really want to get the best out of Canadians, you go to their house. And when I say that, go to Canada, meet them. They're just friendly people, especially French Canadians. They won't like you outside of Quebec, but once you're in Quebec, they treat you really nicely for some reason. You might have to take your shoes off when you go into their house, but that's about it. But no, seriously, it's just a Canadian Music Week, like Mike mentioned, and M for Montreal are areas to get to know the culture, get to know the people behind the music. And that's super important. I mean, again, you can get all the information offline, but once you get to meet these people, it's very genuine, it's very face-to-face, it's very warm and welcoming. And in that setting, you get to make friends, and making friends is how you create success. And all those people in different fields of the industry are there, from music supervisors to booking agents, festival buyers, media. We try to bring them all and put them all in the same room. So the more variety, the more conversation, right? Everyone's there to create business, but also it's in this industry, it's really important to keep in touch and build relationships on a personal level. And I feel that's the way to do it. So I'm not saying just come out here and showcase your band. Come meet the people behind making moves, tastemakers, ones who are actually in the process of working with new music and who makes more sense for you. So there's a pool of things to choose from, and I advocate for these things because everything's there. You can score first base, second base, third base. You can go home run if you're lucky. We've developed artists there from the ground up, and I believe in these methods. Of course, there's going to be publicists there. There's going to be radio pushers and pluggers who want to work with you. That's fine. Those are all necessities, but it's just a part of building your network in Canada, getting to know the market, the people behind the scenes, and sharing your like I said, if you're coming from out of town, you come to Canada, they're very welcoming. They're very open to helping you go in the right direction. So that's always one thing. You don't have to just depend on people you meet. They'll point you in the right direction. That's what we do at M for Montreal. We feel that We do a good job at it, and showcasing your bands in front of these people, you can't beat it. It's face to face, and it's not YouTube. So it's really practical in that sense, and you can cover more than just Canada. You can cover the US and other countries while you're there, and you
Yeah.
can't be doing it in our own backyard. So yeah, I feel you should come out there and shake some hands, basically.
And would you say that like you have such a strong kind of audience culture within Canada that people can come over for their first show and build an audience, and actually, you know, there's a gig going kind of community kind of feel in
Yeah, for
these
sure.
cities that you don't need to worry too much?
I think part of that as well is our relationship with the European territories. Canadians definitely do pay attention to success in Europe as much as Europeans may consider Canadians who are successful. Our, you know, case in point, we work with a client called Billy Talent who was selling, let's call it 1,000 tickets in Toronto for a very long time. And as they started growing in Europe, they're now an arena band here in Canada. But this works on the inverse as well. We pay very close attention to what happens in Europe. So yeah, oftentimes, especially at these conferences like M for Montreal and Canadian Music Week, they're there for discovery. So you can come in on your first shows and start to build a story from there.
And I will say that, you know, you're great at sending your Canadians to Europe for festivals and events. So if you can't afford right now, managers in the room, if you can't afford right now to head over to Canada, make all those connections immediately, really do take a look at who is coming to your local conferences, because especially, you know, Mikey,
Yeah.
you've just been to like 4 or 5 different European conferences. So
we all travel quite a bit. We always have somebody from our office going to the Great Escape. I know Mikey's out all the time. I'm assuming Beth and Sarah have done some trips as well, because we're all very close to Europe.
absolutely. So Beth, I wanted to just talk, obviously we talked about live a bit there, but when it comes to the differences for you, you've said you've worked with international artists and kind of Canadian artists. What's the differences when you're trying to promote an international artist to a homegrown talent, and what's your advice to for everyone in the room to build those kind of audiences and get the attention at?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Mikey and Mike, you know, I made a lot of really valid points about starting at the conference level, starting at the festival level to kind of slowly build. It is a slow burn, as we all know, just slowly build your audience. In regards to press, you know, obviously we have a lot of Canadian content in Canada, and that reflects also not just radio, but also PR. And so some of those story angles that the narrative that the editors or the story chasers are looking for is that Canadian connection. Do you have a long lost uncle that lives in a small town in Nova Scotia that you know, I mean, I worked with an artist who rented Old Man Ludikai, who is an East Coast artist, rented his apartment and wrote her whole album, and she was from Scotland. And so that was like a nice connection to Canada because she worked with a Canadian, like, yeah. So those kinds of like fun stories, people love that stuff. And so I think that, you know, looking ahead from a manager's perspective on where, if the artist already has a connection with Canada, again, there's a lot of expats and stuff, but just building kind of off those stories. And also, like, I think about how many Canadians go over to Europe and artists, and especially with what EACEA does with Canada House, go to Canada House's showcases, meet other Canadian artists in your own, like where you are. We love meeting international artists, and that's how those co-build tours happen, you know, and then those stories are the stories that are really unique and can be super compelling to media. From a live angle, even in Toronto specifically, I've been to shows with international artists, and there's a big Irish community, for example, in Toronto, and the whole audience, like probably I bet you 70% were Irish people. And so there's also that, depending on where, you know, knowing where your community kind of immigrated or resides in Canada, figuring out kind of where you might already have a bit of a fan base in that market too.
It's really interesting, Beth, because I work with an Australian artist who the culture in Australia is not to talk about who you know. And it's looked almost as a negative thing, whereas the expression in Canada very much is "Who's your father?" Right? From Newfoundland, who are you related to? Who are you connected to? Because that is our story. You know, we're very much a folk-centric community with our European descent and storytelling, and so it is about that is how we connect. And it's not, you know, we are honestly interested, and so how can you connect that dots and make it relevant to us is all very, very important.
Amazing. I want to jump on that point, Sarah, and talk a bit more about your experience bringing international artists over to Canada and building their audience there. It would just be great to hear more about how it's gone, what was effective, what give us a bit.
So I've worked primarily with Australian artists in Canada, and the way that they entered the country, so to speak, was through a Canadian conference. So a Canadian conference had a reciprocal agreement with Australian Music Week, and so a Canadian artist showcased there, and an Australian artist was brought over here to showcase. And so that was the entry into. All of a sudden there was all of these industry who were aware of this artist, and it was just a matter of finding someone who could connect those relationships or connect those dots. I found going to the primary markets wasn't where we went first. We actually had much more success in the rural communities, and rural just meaning really non-urban, right? Your smaller opportunities across Canada, and it was really it was fantastic. It was an easy, I guess. The artists I've worked with have quite a lot of accolades, had quite a story, had a lot of build in their home country already. And as soon as Canada found out about it, they're like, what? Bring them here. So that first entry was actually really easy. The return was more difficult, has been more difficult. And the main reason for that is just the size of this market. I mean, to come from Australia, you want to come over, like the artists I work with want to be here for a longer period of time. But then what, do you do the whole country? I mean, we did the whole country last year. It took us 7.5 weeks to go from Whitehorse to St. John's. We had 30 shows. It was insane. Wow. But you can't do that every year. And it's so hard when you're building another market, and if you have 3 or 4 markets that you're visiting, how often do you return to that market? And I think that, and how long can you be away from home? One of my Lloyd Spiegel has 5 children. So he doesn't want to be away from home for 8 weeks. So what do you do when you're coming that far and it's a 32-hour, travel time to come here? And it takes a week to recover. So that's the other thing, is the jet lag is important too. So yeah, so that's been our biggest challenge, has been figuring out how to return to the market. How often do we break the country up? And then we've been collaborating with other Canadian artists, which has been really great to continue the build here.
To jump on Sarah's point, repetition is important. If you're going to come here and invest into Canada, it's not on a one-trip basis. It's difficult to come back. You have to be willing to go invest. You can always tie in your Canadian run with some US stuff like Mikey and I think everybody had sort of mentioned. So you can find ways to get back here and still develop other countries or other territories, but repetition is important.
Great. Just because we kind of ended back up alive, so let's talk about festivals a little bit. Obviously we talked about showcases, and I do want to come to the question and chat about showcases, but what is the festival scene like in Europe? We have our festival scene is so overrun. There are just so many different huge level festivals. What part do they play in your in the scene in Canada? Are they booking international artists? Would they be a good way in rather than a showcase? Like how are you finding these opportunities as well? Like maybe more focused towards Sarah. Mike or Mikey?
Mike, you can speak on the bigger level of festivals. I mean, you work with all of them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the festivals, there's a wide variety of festivals, and there's a wide range of size of festivals. It's a little bit like Europe, although I will admit you guys have a larger festival landscape than us. There's the major top line festivals, like we would compare those to Lollapalooza and festivals like that, let's say, That would be the Osheagas, the Festival d'été de Quebec, the Ottawa Blues Fest, stuff like that. And to be clear, just because the name of a festival has Folk Fest or Blues Fest to it does not mean that's what they're booking. Ottawa City Folk is a large festival in Ottawa that just announced their lineup consisting of all rock bands. So, you know, don't be scared about the name of the festival. They've changed a little bit. That said, there is quite a lot of festivals, and the good thing is there's government support for most of those festivals. On the developmental side, on a younger side of a client, it may be a little bit more complicated to get a European act booked unless there's some story to share in Europe or elsewhere. The reason for that is that a lot of these grants that are being provided to these festivals need to provide a certain amount of Canadian acts. So if they're booking a big European or a big Australian or a big US headliner, those support slots may go to a Canadian act by default because the government mandates it. The government's very protective of their Canadian arts, their Canadian artists. And that's why you'll see a bunch of those grant organizations that were listed from the CIMA document may not actually get you any funding. They could get you information. So to apply for those festivals, I mean, the easiest way is to find a Canadian agent who's willing to work with you. I say that's the easiest way. It's very difficult to find an agent who's available and who has bandwidth. In Canada, there's only a handful of us, and quite frankly, we're all very, very busy. But they exist. They're always looking. If there's anything to do, conferences, like I said, are the best place to find those. And then it's to start pitching, and then it's about your story. So new music that year is very important. Because of our limited size pool and the high demand for festivals, each slot on average will probably see 20 submissions. So you have to stick out from those submissions. That said, that's on the major side of things. There's also rural community festivals, very viable, very important. To Sarah's note, in very many cases, certain genres do better in those rural areas. You know, the Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver's, that's great for hip hop, pop, rock music. But if you're a country act, a folk act, anything like that, those markets are still very viable. But those secondary and tertiary markets, as we call them, they're almost more important. Those areas are where you're going to make your bread and butter. So festivals at all levels are super important. And yes, they play an incredible role into our festival landscape or into our music landscape.
And I think if I can jump in and add to that. So in my experience, and Mike, you can chime into this, like not necessarily will a festival crowd convert to a hard ticket buyer, right? And so even though you play the Ottawa Blues Festival, come back the next year and play live on Elgin, you may or may not see that translation. And so the really important bit is, how do you continue the story in that market until you're coming back again, so that people don't forget about you? Even though you can't be here in person all the time, how do you continue that relationship build with your audience and with the industry who are here?
Agreed. I saw a note from just here. Sorry, I just saw a comment from Alex Jenkins about lots of popular smaller festivals in rural regions of Quebec. That is very true. There is tons of festival properties in Quebec specifically, and I would say Quebec is one of the provinces that pays most attention to European music.
Very interesting. And just on the Quebec thing, how separated are the territories in terms of, like, do you need different booking agents in Quebec and the rest of Canada? Do you need a different PR? Do you need a different radio plugger? Like, how does it work? And what was your advice? Beth, maybe you want to come in on this a little bit.
I mean, from a PR perspective, I think if you personally, for me, like, I don't speak fluent French anymore. And so I do see the value if you are a French speaking artist that is planning to tour Quebec heavily. Maybe you've already built relationships at the conferences at M for Montreal. I do think it's money well spent. I think having conversations always, doesn't mean you have to hire, you're not getting married, but having a consultation with a couple of Quebec PR people to see what they understand that landscape. It is very different than the rest of Canada. So having those conversations, there's nothing wrong with reaching out and trying to have a conversation, especially if you have like a 10-run date set up. and they like the music and they like your story, and you've got a new album coming out in a few months, whether it's in French or English. But yeah, for me, from a PR side, I definitely do advocate to people or suggest to people to hire a publicist in Quebec if there is a strong Quebec angle.
And Sarah, are you working, how do you work? Do you just work with one team across the whole of Canada, or do you have ones that pull in for different?
I've done everything. I've done a little bit of both. And so with my Canadian artist, we have a team in Quebec. She's actually from Quebec, and so she just wanted that extra level of connection. But with my Australian artist, I've done the work in Quebec so far. I speak fluent French, so that hasn't. And it was interesting to me because I didn't. Well, you know, we actually ended up in you know, you chat with some people who don't speak English at all, and so it is really helpful. So the language can be a barrier, but not always a barrier. So don't exclude it. So.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Thank you. I just want to get to a couple of these questions. And I think something that's kind of pulling on this theme of different genres, different areas. We have a question here about the club environment for electronic music. Outside, like, what is the scene outside of the big cities? So not Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, Edmonton, Winnipeg. Is it worth exploring the smaller cities and territories, or is it difficult for international artists, specifically in electronic music? Does anyone want to jump in on this?
My gut just says go to the bigger cities for that. Yeah, that's just my gut, but Mike could probably give you the backup story.
There's a few other markets. It's really based on population. There's a few other markets that will have those nightclubs that will play EDM and DJ type stuff, considering, you know, just outside of Toronto, there's some places in Hamilton and different cities. But if you're developing and you're not confident in bringing a crowd, your start should be Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. They have great clubs with built-in audiences, ways to build a little bit of a fan base. But that's also where most of our population resides. Yeah,
of course. And Mike, oh, sorry, Beth, go.
I just have a quick suggestion too, because when I managed a band, we would get European DJs reaching out about doing remixes. So that's another way, is reaching out to some Canadian artists that you discover on New Music Friday Canada, and just seeing about doing a remix on one of their songs, just name recognition, so people kind of might discover your name through doing a remix with a cool band in Canada,
or even to that point, having a feature on one of your songs. It doesn't necessarily need to be a lot of Canadian acts that are on the cusp of breaking are always looking for that European connection to go themselves develop a new territory. So it's almost mutually agreeable where you're helping each other out in a way.
Yeah, 100%.
100%. There was also a question from one of our board members, actually, but how interesting is it for the Europeans to participate in conferences there as a delegate? Is it global topics, or is it more focused on local market topics? Which ones are the most kind of global, outwardly looking?
Well, I would just say one thing, just because Canadians are so interested in going to Europe. I think having Europeans, I mean, we have them on panels all the time over here. So that is absolutely great. I mean, how lucky could we be to have someone give us firsthand information about the European market and art? So yes, absolutely.
It's worth it. But I think it was more about the topics that were talked about at the conference, but I mean, for that reason alone, it's worth going for sure.
Yeah, Mike, I think most of the Canadian conferences, they really want to focus on international. That's the whole point, because they don't want to be stuck home all winter. So they really do bring in that international angle. They lean on it very heavy. The whole point, I think, of all this funding is for export. And we're always looking at ways to work with other countries. And that's the focus, I think, of every conference in Canada. So it's never really Canadian centric. Canadian Music Week will have a mix of variety, local, regional, and international. But yeah, it's all for all. It's not just Canada, but there's a lot to learn from Canada while you're there for sure.
Canadian Music Week specifically focuses on importing industries from certain countries every year. I believe this year is India. I might be wrong.
Oh, cool.
But they've had a focus on Sweden. They've had a focus on, every year is a different focus where they personally invite people from certain industries. Regardless of that, all of these conferences, like Mikey was saying, they're all focused on international in a very big way.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. We're coming towards the end, so I just wanted to make sure that we touched on the sync market, because this is something that a lot of people, and especially in Europe, there's a lot more focus on looking at exporting your music through sync and looking for opportunities in this. And so, yeah, what is the sync market like there? What are the opportunities looking like? Beth, I think we talked before a little bit about this. Where would you start if you were an international artist?
If I was, for me, I would start at literally just Googling Canadian music supervisors and looking up their IMDb's, what they have in pre-production, post-production, because we know music is generally the last thing that's added, unless it's written for a scene. So start kind of those conversations, and then look up Canadian music publishers. And a lot of these people do attend a ton of conferences across our country. They go internationally to other conferences. But yeah, the Guild of Music Supervisors is a great resource too. Real Canada. And, you know, from all the stuff I ever see, especially music supervisors, each person has their different way of being approached to pitch music. So I think it's important to, you know, be mindful of that. Go and check their reels and see if they've done a video on how you should approach them instead of just blindly approaching them. But the IMDb thing, I think, is really a really powerful tool, just so you can see what kind of show they're working on. If they're working on Heartland, which is a, you know, Western, you're not going to pitch them stuff that's not going to suit that program. But yeah, I definitely think that there's the Sync Award nominees just came out. So if you Google the Canadian Sync, you can see who all the nominees were. So there's lots of names there that you can go and check out.
Sure, thank you for that, and thank you, Aideen, for sharing the link to the Guild of Music Supervisors. That's really useful.
Yeah. There's also TIFF in Toronto once a year. It's it's a conference for supervisors, and it feels like I mean, they're very hard to find in person. They hide as much as they can, but I do know they love Canada, and to them it's like, oh, it's foreign, you know, but it's just like up the road. They do like spending time there, and that's a great way to connect with them. And we bring a bunch at M for Montreal, and they love coming to M, and they love network. They love Canadians. So if you catch international supervisors in Canada, they're in a good mood, just letting you know.
You'll hear us talk about conferences quite a bit, but that's literally because that's how the Canadian music industry connects with everybody. This is our time to meet with everybody, and it's very sacred for our country almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, sorry,
Jess, go ahead.
No,
I was just going to reiterate about Folk Alliance International is in Montreal next year, which I think it's every 5 years that it comes to Canada. And I know last time when it was there, a lot of international artists attended it. And Folk Music Ontario, if you are a smaller artist, I do find that Folk Music Ontario is can just be a little bit easier to kind of start, because FAI is really big, but Folk Music Ontario does bring in international artists. And Sarah and I both work with Mia Kelly, and she's going on tour with Charma Finches. I don't know if that came out of that one, but she's doing a European UK tour with them, and they're so
they're an Australian duo who met at Folk Alliance in Kansas City 2 years ago, and now they're touring together in the UK.
Amazing. And yeah, that's a really good point to look at, just the fact that it is easier for European artists to travel to Canada and perform in Canada because of visas. So
and just a quick thing, just to bring back, we were talking about funding earlier. So when I spoke about that 7.5 week tour I did across Canada with my Australian artist, I paired him with put him with 2 other Canadians. So there were 3 on the road, wrote an album together. We registered with one of our funding bodies here as a collective, and so that collective was over 50% Canadian, and so we were allowed to get tour funding to support that tour. So that was really, really helpful. So there are little tricks.
Such an interesting point, because there is a really a real envy of your funding structures and over there. So learning how.
But our taxes you can't escape from either. So just so people know, so there is, you will have a 15% withholding tax on your gross fee across the board.
24
there
in
is
Quebec.
paperwork. Yeah, right. So you have to, yeah. So it's 24, Mike, is in Quebec?
24% in Quebec. It's 15
Right.
everywhere else. Just for everybody to be aware.
And so the artists that I've worked with have always filed their Canadian income tax and gotten all that money refunded to them. But it is going to happen. So just so you're aware.
There is you can also apply for tax withholding exemption prior to your tour, but that would usually take around 90 days. So you have to be well prepared for that.
Really well prepared. That's absolutely great to know, though. So yeah, we're coming to the end, and I just want to know if you have any like last minute tips, last minute points that you want to share with the audience, while everyone else has an opportunity to ask their last minute questions as well. Just calling out to the audience there. But yeah, what would be your like your last piece of advice, or even a really good example of what you've seen somebody else do internationally for coming over, building audiences in Canada? We're really interested to hear it.
I have an old school method of a way that I've seen it work over the years, but spending more time here, like residencies, getting to know the people, like spending a month here and once a week play a certain spot, just connecting with the local community will open so many doors into the market, and build some friendships. And you always need friends when you travel like this. So I really strongly feel that taking the time to spend time in their city, getting to know people, they'll have a lot of respect for you and they'll want to help you. Canadians are very helpful, very insightful, and they want to make you feel at home. So the longer you spend there, they will treat you that way. And I've seen artists from Iceland come spend 2 weeks in Montreal, and now they know all of my friends. And it's like they just did it naturally. And that's just the best way to do it. And not making it feel forced, showing respect for their community, their scene. And then things can snowball from there. It's just really about getting to know people, showing your face, and taking the time. Yeah.
And like we said before, on the flip side, so if you see Canadians touring in your market, go support them, because if you come to Canada, I promise you they will let you stay in their spare bedroom. They will pick you up from the airport. They will feed you a meal. That's just what we do over here.
I think to that point, like what we're all trying to say is come. Your best way to develop the market is to come here, or be there and meet with the industry. But more importantly, come try it, because I can guarantee you what'll happen if you don't come.
I love it. Beth, any other last minute additions?
No, I love everyone's. I mean, we all know networking and building relationships in a genuine way are key to our industry. Canada is a small market, and we like. I know all these people on the panel through different walks of life, and yeah, it is. I just love. We love international artists, and so yeah, taking the time to build those relationships, and not because you're trying to get something out of it, but genuinely, trying to build a community here is really important.
And we're a culture that wants to help out. So you need, like, just ask. Oh, well, maybe I can't help you, but maybe I know Beth who might be able to know someone who can connect you. Like, just don't be afraid to ask. And we're very open to helping.
We're much smaller than the US, so we do consider this almost a music industry family. So if you treat us like family, it'll be reciprocated as well.
Great.
Oh, yeah. And those people who go to New York and LA, we're around the border, so it's like hurt, while you're here. So it's not like you're flying to a different continent. We're neighbors, and there's a lot of territory to cover here for sure on both.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all of that. Any last minute questions from the audience? Feel free to go for it quickly. But other than that, yeah, I'm getting such a amazing community feel from Canada, and having been a few times and having attended some of the great events that you talked about, I can just advocate for heading over and having a great time and looking for those opportunities that Sarah was talking about, working out what's right for you in terms of maybe not necessarily hitting the big cities right away, maybe the opportunities for you are elsewhere. Connect definitely with the organizations that we've highlighted in the presentation, which we will send to you. Connect with them if you're heading over. As I said, everyone's looking to help out, so you might find other opportunities. You might find help with funding, connecting with artists, connecting with other team members. It can be really, really, really important. Thanks so much for you all for being here, and it's been a really great conversation. And thanks to the whole audience. As a quick reminder, we will, when I close the session, you will have a questionnaire pop up. Please do answer it. It'd be really, really useful to hear more about your thoughts and what you want to know about. And this recording will be available, will be sent to everyone who's registered, so you'll be able to access it in the future for a reminder of all of the brilliant things that these wonderful people have said. So thank you again for joining us, and thanks to our audience. I will see you all again soon. Bye.
Everybody, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.